Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, because we all love game nights with our family and friends. But when you play solo games, then every night can be a game night. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 151, SpaceCorp, and on-ramp to Wargames. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. With today's episode, I'm going to go way out of my comfort zone and talk about war games. So I'm not going to talk about war games. I have some friends that have agreed to pop on the show to talk a little bit about war games with me. So it's one of those things I get requested every once in a while because we are popular in the solo gaming community, especially over in the One Player Guild. This is definitely a One Player Guild thing, not so much in the Facebook groups and some of the other places where solo gamers hang out. A little bit of an older school feel over there, and that's where the proto solo gamers are the war gamers, which is a little bit weird how that happened. I'm not really sure how that all worked out, how wargaming became solo gaming. I'd love to hear somebody explain that, how those are the original war gamers, maybe because that was a game where you couldn't find a lot of people. So people just got used to setting up bots and playing both sides and all that kind of stuff. Whatever. So going to give you some wargaming content this week. I got Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire and Tommy Ray, who is a listener. I love it when listeners hit me up and they say, here's a suggestion for a topic. Could you please hear about it? I'm liable to say, well, if you want to hear about it, let's come on the show and you talk about it. Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes people say no, like, nah, just do it yourself. But Tommy was game. Really, really happy to have him on the show and talking about war games. We are going to talk about it from the perspective of on-ramp to war games, breaking down that barrier, getting into wargaming as a newbie, which is something that I hear a lot of questions about. It's like, okay, how do I get started? These are giant games, multiple hours, or, I go on the forums and it's like not the most welcoming place in the world. So how can I get started? Really happy to have two people, Tommy and Liz, who just started that journey themselves, maybe over the last year or two, and they have some insights. They share a lot of games to help you get started on that journey. So if you have a topic that you'd like to hear about, I'm game. I'll talk about anything as long as it's relevant to the games that we cover over here, solo or co-op and Euros and you know what we do here at Every Night is Game Night. It's been 151 episodes. So if you have a topic, please hit me up. Every Night is Game Night Facebook group, everynightisgamenight.com, which is our website, sisterofboardgamersanonymous.com. Go please hit up that Patreon. BGA has a Patreon. It supports Every Night is Game Night, at least on a peripheral level, so we get a little bit of money to keep the site going, keep the exposure going, all that good stuff. So whatever you can do to contribute, that would be great. Pope Sixtus is my username on Board Game Geek. Please send me a geek mail. If you have a topic, I can't stress this enough, the chances are pretty decent that I will cover it, and they're just as decent that I might even invite you on the show. So one more item of business, and that is Liz in the Liz We Trust segment. You're getting double Liz this week. She is on the regular episode talking about war games, but she's also here to talk about another awesome Kickstarter. Hit it, Liz.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here to encourage your Every Night is Game Night acquisition disorder. This week, I want to talk about Cosmic Run Express. It's a small, snappy card game from Dr. Finn set in the Cosmic Run universe. This time you'll be playing cards at different planets in an attempt to be the first player to reach all three. Players will score movement points based on the configurations in which they play their cards, representing their journey towards those new worlds. This campaign also includes extras for players who've enjoyed Cosmic Run games, such as a mini expansion for Cosmic Run Rapid Fire. If you enjoy games that are small, quick, and clever, or are a Cosmic Run fan in general, this one may be for you. Check it out before the campaign ends on Friday, August 23rd. Happy gaming!
Hey everybody, so this will be our first review of a GMT game on this episode. This game, though, is very unlike usual GMT fare, more in the Euro exploration, low conflict, low interaction space. We are going to be reviewing SpaceCorp 2025-2300 AD. And I have brought along with me a friend who was nice enough to come over on my birthday. He didn't know if he could say so. It's way past my birthday by the time you hear this. But on my birthday, he came over to my house and taught me the game. We played through a couple of phases. This is Brandt from the Wargaming podcast and the Dice Tower. He has been on the show before. Welcome to the show, man.
Hello, Jason. Yeah, we were playing some SpaceCorp here, so I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of how this game works, because like Jason said, it's definitely different from your normal GMT fare. It's got much more of a Euro game, thematic Euro feel to it. So basically you're playing through three eras. You are a corporation trying to profit from exploring space and setting up industry and attractions and places for people to go and expand and whatnot throughout the galaxy. So you play over three eras. The first, we're exploring kind of near space, Mars, the moon, etc. Then we explore our galaxy in phase 2, and then the last phase you're going to distant galaxies.
So if you, anybody fans of The Expanse, that TV show, you know how that it's in space, but it's near space. It's, Mars and Ceres and Uranus.
Right.
So like that first phase, you're just getting to Mars. That second phase, you're going to the solar system planets. And right now we're kind of looking at the third board, and it looks pretty crazy in this third board.
So the turns are really simple. It's a card-driven game. Not like the card-driven war games they make, but in terms of like hand management and all that. So on your turn, you just pick one action. You can move your teams across space. You can explore the regions to find all sorts of discoveries. You can build a base, and there's different bases of different types. You can research to gain new cards from the row, and then there's just a few other things to gain upgrades and other things like that. So turns are really fast. You choose an action, you play it, you have an infrastructure board in front of you where you have kind of preset, like I see Jason's now, he's got move 8 on his, I might have move 5 on mine, and then I can add any cards from my hand to that to be able to move the distances, and there's all sorts of barriers and things you have to cross. Once you get to a space, you have to explore it, like I said, so you take that action and build a base there, and so you're just doing that, and then at the end of your turn, if you have 4 or less cards, you draw a card, and when the deck runs out, that will finish the era. Or there are goals that you're trying to achieve in each phase, and when 6 of the 7 goals are achieved, that will end the era. So that will give you victory points for doing that. So it gives you something to do rather than just the vast openness of space.
So this game's been compared a lot to Terraforming Mars. Favorite of our show, one of Anthony's top 5 favorite games. So I could see it. This is much more on the exploration side, much more. Not that it's you don't have the thrill of opening a tile. The tiles are mostly, you do flip over tiles, but it's mostly here's a water droplet tile, or it's not, it's some kind of resource, and you get money, which is trillions of dollars, which is a point. $1 trillion is 1 point. And you're kind of going around and getting points slowly that way. And then as the phases go, you'll get points faster and faster. The numbers just grow exponentially. So it might take move 1 to move out of, from Earth to the moon. But then it takes move 100 to move to Orion Spur, which is this way out galaxy towards the end of the game. So would it be fair to say that this is kind of what would you say that the arcing up of this? Would you say it's kind of a linear arc up, or does it kind of spike up in complexity and all that stuff?
It definitely increases in complexity. The 3 phases do. The first one, I was even telling you, there is options to be able to skip some of them. Mm-hmm. And the first era is pretty basic, but it's great for learning the game, getting it down, just getting your infrastructure set. And it adds rules as you go through each one, but it's not a sharp. It's not a sharp arc in terms of that, but there's definitely more. I guess it's linear on that approach. There's just a little bit more and then a little bit more, but it's not flat. It's not constant.
Right.
Sorry, my algebra teacher is kicking in.
I almost said asymptote. For those of you who don't know what an asymptote is, I barely know, but I see the spike upwards. It is not that. It is a fairly flat kind of complexity curve upwards, but you do get a little bit more. Okay, so one of my big things is what headspace am I in when I'm playing this game? And it's definitely an explorer headspace where you're slowly moving out and expanding your territory. It's not like an area control. It's a little bit because you're building bases nobody else can build on those bases. but it's not like you're competing for that territory. It's definitely more of an explorer type thing, which I enjoyed. Okay, so I really want to say great things about this game. I really like this game, but I can't get away from my big negative of my experience, which I've only played like 2 phases of a game. I definitely want to play more. Brandt has played a lot more. It's repetitive. Like it's explore, or it's move, explore, build, move, explore, build, move, explore, build. And those are the main 3 actions in the game, and that's really most of what you're doing. I mean, we barely interacted. We just kind of did our thing, and it's a question of timing. How fast can you hit some of these goals? Do you have to pause and draw cards? Do you push your luck a little bit to draw cards that you need in order to make special effects, or do you have it on hand? But at the core experience is move, explore, build. I mean, how did you experience that, like, repetitiveness, having played with solo and 2-player and 4-player?
Yeah, so I think you're definitely right in terms of that, but I kind of group those 3. Like, a beat isn't move, a beat is explore. I think a beat is move, explore, build.
Yes.
So by the time you decide where you're going to move, you already know you're going to explore and build there. You've decided that. So after that build, it's where am I going to go next? And so I think that is a strong decision point in the game prior to that move. So that doesn't bother me. I know it kind of feels like the other turns are then on rails, but then you get to decide where you want to go after that.
That's 3 turns. Let's be clear. Move, explore, build is 3 turns.
But turns are fast in this game. Turns are 20, 30 seconds. So it's not too bad in terms of that. There's all these adaptation and genetics cards you can get there, and then the goals are kind of the places to go, so you're looking towards that, where the other players are. I think you're right in terms of interaction with 2 players. This was by far the lowest interaction.
Oh my God, we barely even knew each other were there.
Right. The 4-player board definitely fills up a little bit more, and you're trying to decide what you're going to do, and other people jump on where you want to be. Not heavily, but it definitely happens. And the solo play is wonderful.
All right, here we go. That's what I'm talking about.
The Automa, which it's not, so I apologize for using that term when it's something else, but the deck that runs that, I know it's not the people that make that one, but the deck that runs it really works on getting in your way. And so that feels really interactive. Like, okay, I wanted to go there, but they jumped on that space, so now what am I going to alt to? Now what am I going to alt to? Not so much so that you're constantly alting, but right as your plan's about to go through, you've got to alt, which is what you're looking for.
So is it competing with a score against you, or is it just getting your way and you have to hit score thresholds in a certain amount of time?
It's just getting in your way, and you have to beat the score threshold.
My favorite. I hate keeping track of all of my scores. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there any... I mean, that's kind of the game, you know? There's a lot to explore here. I really enjoyed it. I had that one kind of real big hang-up about the seeming repetitiveness of it. Like, we didn't play the 3rd phase. The 3rd phase doesn't look that different, just bigger numbers. And maybe you get a little bit more of these adaptation cards, quote unquote, which are like kind of these standing powers that combo with what you got. But it's like the combo is move 5 and move 4. You know, that's not a combo. It's just like additive, not multiplicative. But I like the core experience. I like being in the headspace of that explorer, moving out, choosing where I can go. I guess the simplicity kind of makes it so that, a big game like this, you can get a big game like this in, like solo takes like an hour?
Once you know it, solo is down to, that's what the box says, 1 to 4 hours, so I assume that's 1 hour per player.
Right.
There's a little bit of setup, there's a little bit of fiddliness in between, but at least it's in between, right? Like you almost want a little break for your brain, like, oh, let me flip the board and the cards and stuff. Solo's probably an hour to an hour and a half.
So you're getting the feeling of going from Earth to the outer planets to these different galaxies all in an hour, which terraforming Mars, that was cool to kind of terraform the planet, but I felt that was, that could be kind of static. This one, I can definitely feel like in an hour, you really feel like you did something. I get that Mage Knight feeling where at the end of the 4 hours, you've done all the stuff.
Yeah.
You can look back at your conquest. You can look back at the fallen cities. And it's like, wow, I did that. Kind of tell a story to yourself. The boards doesn't quite persist, but it's so memorable. Like, I built these attractions on this natural wonder on Ceres. And, you can kind of keep that in your head. And by the time you finish with the outer planet, I could see that really sticking with you and be like, wow, I did something really fun there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make the the direct Terraforming Mars comparison, I do think Terraforming Mars is a better game. Okay. Multiplayer and solo. But I love the engine build of the cards, where now I've got way too many things I could do in a round.
Right.
Whereas this one has like a rotating engine, right? Because you only have so many cards you can put on your board here, and you rotate them out, so you kind of change the way that that's going to look. But I agree with you on the explore aspect. Like, you definitely feel like you went somewhere, you did something, you changed scenery, whereas Terraforming Mars is kind of like, water's supposed to be here, and now water's there.
Yeah.
You kind of know what it's going to look like when it's done.
Yeah, I mean, like, in Terraforming Mars, let's say you play solo, you play the 14 rounds, right? And the first couple rounds, like, in fact, the first 6 rounds, you barely do anything.
Right.
But then in those last 3 rounds, it's like, here's 40 money, you get to build 7 water. Right. Like, it just spikes so high without adding a lot of complexity. That feeling is, like, very unique. I've yet to feel that comfortable and smooth, but a spike, yet just really satisfying payoff. This isn't that. This is slower. It doesn't, like you were saying before, it doesn't like the engine building. You don't get like play, and you get 7 things. Here it's you play, and you add a bunch of numbers, and you can move a little bit further. Yeah. So, which is fine, and it's a different play experience. I think what Brandt is saying, that I think he had a better play experience with Terraforming Mars. I don't know that this is necessarily a worse of a game, but it is different feeling enough, even though you're playing kind of in space and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, if you're asking me to direct compare, which do I like better?
Right.
That's what that piece is. But I really like the game. You said an hour and a half, that's the solo play. It is going to be 3 to 4 hours, your first play with 3 or 4 players, if you go to that front. So realize that. And it definitely feels like it has a lot of rules, but as you get it down, then there's just not as much. So that first play will add on a little bit, but you should start rolling definitely by the second era.
Move, explore, build, move. If you know that.
You draw any produce cards. And I drew a lot of things with genetics, so I think that changed a little bit.
There are some side things you could do, yeah. So a positive review from us. We really enjoyed SpaceCorp. Brandt, thank you so much for helping me out. Thanks for coming over and teaching me. We are going to get over to Liz in the continuation of GMT Elizabeth. Perhaps we'll even have a guest with us. So thank you, my man. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you later.
Awesome. See you, everybody. Thanks.
Hey everybody, we are back with our feature discussion for the episode. This is On-Ramp into Wargames. So as I explained in the intro, I wanted to cover Wargames because, it's been 151 episodes. We cover solo and we've yet to mention a single Wargame. Maybe 1 or 2 here or there. I definitely did want to give a little bit of play because this is a huge thing among, solo gamers. Love our war games, and so I wanted to at least get a little bit of coverage in there. However, I have to acknowledge that I'm a complete noob and I don't see myself getting into it big time anytime soon. So I wanted to invite a couple of people on the call who are getting onto it. They're not experts. These are not people who have played every single war game ever, but they're getting into it and they have different perspectives and different strategies. And I'm really eager to hear what they have to say. So I have 2 guests with me. The first is a person who has not been on the show before. He is a listener. He is not a content creator. He is just a listener. He's a great, great guy. Got to know him a little bit, just kind of interacting. This is Tommy from Centerville. Did I get that right?
You got that right, Jason.
We were joking before the call. It's Tommy from Centerville. First time, long time. Here you go. So welcome to the show, Tommy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
And helping us out is our friend, at this point, ENGN's longest running correspondent. Always welcome back on the show. It is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire. We have borrowed her from the Dice Tower. She is back on our little podcast. Welcome back, Liz.
I'm always happy to be back. And let's be real, I never forget who originally had me on their show.
That's it. I just a diamond in the rough. There you go, Liz. I found you when you were rough coal, and now you are a perfect gaming diamond.
Working on it.
All right. So the discussion topic for this week is on-ramping to word games. The reason why we're talking about this is it is difficult. You hear posts, you see all the stuff, and then you open the wargaming page or you go into the forum, and it's this huge barrier. I think there are a lot of, for a lot of reasons, the games are complicated. There's like a kind of a gatekeeper thing going on. So how can we help get people into wargaming, which is, a very, very cool thing if you can actually get into it. We're going to start with Tommy first. Tommy has a very interesting road when it comes to this stuff. Getting into modern wargaming recently, but you have a very long history with wargames. So let's start there. We'll go.
Okay, so this may sound a little silly, but my first game that got me into gaming and got me into wargaming is one that everybody probably knows. It's called Risk.
No shame in that game. Come on now.
Yeah,
that Risk is fine. Or it was fine back in that time. Yeah,
so my parents bought me that as a teenager. I think I was probably 12 or 13 years old. And I don't know. I liked the game. I fell in love with the game. And I liked it so much, and I couldn't get my brothers and sisters to play with me. So then I took the next step. I just played six-handed Risk. So that was my first foray into solo gaming. And over time, through high school, through college, I ventured in some other war games. I never got real heavy into it. I picked up a game called B-17 Queen of the Skies. It was World War II, try to survive 25 missions. It was a solitaire game. Picked up one Air Force when I was in college. Of course, I was in Air Force ROTC, and of course, we played a game called Air Force. That was another World War II game, and I have fond memories of that. Going over to my friend's house, and we'd pull all-nighters playing that game. Mm-hmm. Ambush was another solitaire game. I want to say the name Butterfield.
Yes, John Butterfield.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so that's a 45-year-old game that I was playing then. Really, and so that probably ended late 80s. Then life interrupted, and I stepped away from gaming. Got back into the hobby board gaming. Probably about 11 or 12 years ago. And then really focused on, I was just amazed at what happened to the hobby board gaming industry, but I really didn't step into wargaming till maybe a year and a half or so ago. I started working back into it. And I'm still working into it.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we are going to get into the games that you're using in order to break down the barrier. I mean, both of you guys are in the position of just getting into it, saying, I'm interested in this, and I'm not going to let the barrier stop me, which is really cool. I want to hear more about that. Let's start with Liz on that process. I remember, I think it was, last year, you were emailing me going, I think I'm going to get into war games. We'll see how this goes. It's a year later. How is it going?
It is going. It's actually been a good process. So for me, the interest in war games is just an interest in historical themes. Mm-hmm. So those of you who listen to me yammer enough know that I'm a Latin teacher. So games about ancient Rome are just catnip for me. But I also like other sort of interesting historical themes. I'm always wondering, in what ways can I look at games about history in order to understand how we understand history now, and what kind of discussions are we having in the games, like nerdy stuff. So, mm-hmm. So I decided that I wanted to start playing some more war games to kind of explore, I guess, that aspect of my gaming life and how I approach games. So the thing that I have discovered is that honestly, war games are just games. I mean, they're just games. They have a lot of rule books, but Fantasy Flight games do now too. Learning. There are a lot of good kind of little intro ones to start with. So I've been getting a lot of play out of war games that are mostly like hobby board games, so it's kind of easier to make the hop. So for me, something like Wars of Marcus Aurelius from Hollenspiel is great because you're basically just looking at cards, and they're multi-use cards, and you're deciding what to do with them. Like, there are a lot of games like that. So just because this one happens to be about the Marcomannic Wars and pushing, barbarian tribes back as a Roman general, it still feels mechanically a lot like a game that you could play with a different theme. Mm-hmm. That does not necessarily a war game. And so I've been looking for a lot of those and then kind of moving from there. So now I've got, Sky looking at me from the shelf. We've been spending some time together. So it escalates.
We'll get to that one in a second.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, put a question out there. As you were speaking, this question kind of came to me. So I guess I'll go to Tommy when you're talking about like playing Risk. with your family, I assume, right? You play Risk with your family?
Yes. Yes.
So let me know if this is accurate or not. Your family remembered war, like America being at war. And, America is war now, but it's this weird forever war, and it's just kind of this low intensity compared to what it's been. But your family remembers war. So did that matter, in terms of a game like Risk or Fortress America? I played a lot of Fortress America when I was a kid. But, that generation remembers that stuff. And our generation doesn't know that. Like, it doesn't know, like, a mass mobilization. It doesn't know the draft. It doesn't know all the stuff. So do you think that contributes to the wargaming genre kind of being a little bit more siloed, a little bit more out of the mainstream? Do you think so?
It's possible. I think that contributes to it. I think another element that contributes to it is the complexity of what we would call a traditional war game, right? So What's a traditional war game? A lot of hexes and counters on maps, and hundreds possibly, and then just trying to resolve all that. And those were trying to, and they're doing those things that people remember. A lot of World War II games, a lot of Korean War games, a lot of Vietnam era games, Revolutionary War games, ancient games. There are a lot of games out there that are like that.
Mm-hmm. So, what Liz was saying, that the whole, war games are just games, like that's kind of a modern thing, right?
Yeah. So I would say that the traditional war game has transitioned over into what we call the modern hobby wargaming industry, and there are lots of hybrid games out there. I heard one commentator refer to them as waros, right? A war game. Yeah. A war game, Euro game, right?
I will never get that out of my head. A waro. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Mark Johnson on his podcast used the term. And he was referring to the coin series of games is what he was referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of hybrid Euro war game.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about that, Liz? Do you agree generally?
So I will say that I have not ventured all the way over into traditional hex and counter, but I will say that when it comes to coins, since that's what we're specifically talking about, what's interesting about them is that none of the specific moves that you can do in the game are that weird. All it is readjusting your perspective to where you actually understand what every action in the game does and like learning how to read a more complicated board state, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But no individual action in that game is that crazy. And I guess I think about traditional wargaming and didn't D&D come from wargaming?
Yes, chainmail.
I would be super interested if I knew exactly what to play in kind of going back through time through games and kind of seeing that evolution, because I think that's like a very interesting thing, thinking about where our games are coming from. I don't know. I guess I also just sort of feel like definitions just get really complicated the more you press at them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess you could say it's a war game Euro, but I also feel just comfortable calling it a war game. I have a very loose definition and understanding of what a war game would be just because of the perspective that I come from. I think a lot of people who approach it from the hobbyist end, like me, are like, oh yeah, it's about war. It's a war game. Mm-hmm. It's got a vaguely historical theme. We'll just put it in that.
Yeah, like Academy games are releasing their learning games. They are not traditional war games. I'm thinking like 1776 or
1775. That's an excellent game, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good game.
That's so. I guess that can transition into giving the people concrete examples. Like, I guess the best way to start is at these hybrid points of games that are a little bit down, but they translate into these other, whether it's a card game or whether it's the kind of a waro or something like that. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could start with some examples of these are the titles that you want to look out for when you want to start exploring some of the space. And you mentioned, I'll start with you, Tommy. You mentioned before the call a very simple card game that you really enjoy called Fort Sumter.
Yeah, so it's published by GMT Games. Fort Sumter, obviously, where the Civil War, I guess the first shots were fired. it's what I would call a card-driven game. Maybe if people haven't heard of this game, a very, very simplified explanation of that game would be a simplified version of Twilight Struggle, just put in the Civil War. And I'm talking simple, really simple. So it takes historical events, it creates these cards, it creates these events out of these cards, and depending on which player plays the card, it could benefit them, it could benefit their opponent, or they can use the card for a different purpose. Just use the points off the card.
Mm-hmm.
It plays through 3 rounds, there's about 3 different ways to score victory points. It's really simple. The scores will be in the 9-6 range, 9-7. I think I lost one game 3-2. But it plays very quickly, 15 or 20 minutes. It brings a little bit of a war game flavor, but it's not real heavy. It's really light. And the other thing I would add to it, it's not all strategic. It's about 50% luck, card draw, and 50%, strategic. How do you play the cards you're dealt?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about gateway stuff over here, and this is about as gateway as it gets, it sounds like. And
there's a good app out for it, which I think I may buy the box version now. I like the app so much. So,
do you have to find a human opponent in the app, or can you just play against the AI?
You can play against the AI.
All right. We're talking before on chat, and you were mentioning a couple of games. So GMT is going to play very heavily, obviously, in a conversation like this. So we reviewed SpaceCorp at the beginning of the episode, which is another GMT game. So, but there are titles from other companies that you had highlighted. You mentioned Wars of Marcus Aurelius, and I know you had a couple of other suggestions, Liz, as like these hybrid entry points to kind of help you get a little bit deeper into the wargaming hobby.
Yeah, so I've actually been I've been really enjoying DBG games recently. So I like stuff from Dan Versen. One of my absolute favorite games of the past year, and I'm probably going to put together a Dice Tower review for it because I just think there needs to be one, is Pavlov's House, which is designed by David Thompson. And it is set at the Battle of Stalingrad, so it's out of my historical interest range, but I really actually enjoyed learning about the scenarios involved like through the game. But also it's this really interesting resource management game. You are basically both the Russian army on one side of the river and the guys who are trapped in Pavlov's house, and you're trying to make both sides of the board work against the Germans who are constantly encroaching on you and messing with your support structures, and also with Pavlov's house itself and coming for your guys. And it's very tense, it's very dramatic, but it's really just playing your cards well. You draw some cards, dealing with event cards that are always going to be horrible, and then there's a little bit of tactical stuff inside of the house with some little counters and chits and stuff, but it's nothing that's really that complicated. And I kind of like that as a start to wargaming, because it's like, oh, look, here's some little cardboard guys with some stat numbers on them, and I can understand them very easily. And it's just one part of the game, so I don't feel like I'm dealing with an entire map of just craziness.
Is that something that you're familiar with, Tommy?
I am familiar with the game. I've not played the game. I want to try the Tabletopia version of it. It's on my list to do, right? But I'm definitely interested in that game.
Yeah, I actually, off the strength of that game, I backed Castle Itter as well, which is by the same designer, and it's in the same kind of series.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be excited to get that. I think that's gonna fulfill soon. Another DVG title I just gotta mention, because I did not know that I needed a game about like warplanes in my life, but I do. It's Thunderbolt Apache Leader, which I actually just got because it shows up on the People's Choice Top 100 all the time.
It's the highest rated war game that's not Comancheria or like Navajo Wars, that system.
Yeah.
It's the one that just shows up over and over again.
And so I finally ordered it, and I wanted to know why. And now I know why. It's excellent. It's really, really good. It's got this really fun kind of planning aspect to it, where you're keeping track of your pilot's experience and stress levels and all this different stuff on sheets of paper. and you're like budgeting points that you can spend to get really cool weapons and planes. So part of it's like the planning phase of the game, and then part of it's where you're playing these missions and you're trying to take out enemies. And it comes down to die rolls, which can be frustrating, but I think a lot of war games are like that, frankly, because they all seem to have die rolls in them. Mm-hmm. But it's really dramatic and it's fun, and it matters whether you're like flying low or whether you had to pick up altitude and attract the attention of enemies, and your planes can get damaged. You have to track that. I don't know, in some ways it's almost like it's not that different from playing a fantasy game where your character levels up and you have different weapons and you have to deal with like persistent statuses and stuff. I mean, but it's warplanes and it's really good. I just love it.
What's a good analog for it? Because it sounds like every game, like a fantasy game, sort of tracking all that kind of thing. There's modules and things you could do. Like, what would be a good analog for it?
Oh God, you put me on the spot.
Ask you the hard questions. Tommy gets the softballs. You get the hard ones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that makes it different, and the reason I keep comparing it to D&D, even though it's a different game, is that you actually have a physical piece of paper that you track everything on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of any fantasy games I've played recently that actually were like that.
So, like, Folklore had a piece of paper. It was like,
yeah,
it was a board game, but then you tracked a lot of stuff and you were racing and there's a lot going on.
Yeah, but I do like you have like a little record of your campaign and stuff at the end of the game too. It's really neat. I feel like it has enduring value as a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the top 100 because the top 100 solo, we're definitely going to do that. We do it every year. It's one of our most popular episodes. So we're as long as Kevin's up for it. And there's a small list of war games that make the list every year. And you have to be really careful because some of those war games, you could just pop them open and they're great. And some of them are 7 hours long. You can't really tell just from looking at titles and glancing at the descriptions like, oh my God, I've bit off more than I can chew. That's kind of my fear when it comes to some of these games. Like, I looked at Comancheria and I'm like, I'm interested in that stuff, but oh my God, it's so long. It's so involved.
I have loved it though, so I'm really glad you traded me your copy because it has been getting love.
Really? Have you
at Casa Davidson?
Very nice. Have you played Navajo Wars or Comancheria, Tommy?
No, but I want one of the two. It's on my trade list on BGG. I don't want both of them. I think I would just want one of them. I'm waiting for them to get republished at GMT. They're kind of hard to get and expensive right now, so I'm waiting for them to. And they're both getting ready to be republished. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have a P500 order for Navajo Wars right now, so I'm waiting. Tommy, what is the longest war game that you've been playing recently? Since Jason's mentioned length.
The longest war game are my solo games of the coin series. They take forever.
I was just getting to that. Like, thank you very much for leading in, because once you get those middle kind of, hybrid war games we're calling, then it sounds like you might be ready for something in the coin series, which let's talk a little bit about that. I think that's a name that gamers know in terms of the name, but they might not know what exactly it is. So maybe, Tommy, you've played a couple of these. Maybe you can explain what they're all about. Just
generally what they're all about. So, yeah. How would I describe these? So they take historical elements. They can go from ancient history to recent history to even modern history. There's one on the current war on terrorism out right now. That's just gotten a recent update, because we've had some, recent news lately. But generally what it is, it originally started the COIN. It's an acronym for counterinsurgency. So some of the early games were focused on multiple factions, usually 4 in most of these games. I think there's one with 2. There's one that's getting ready to release that only has 3. The one I think that we may talk about has a non-player faction, which adds a 5th. But most of them have 4 factions that all have they're pushing different agendas, right? They have different goals and different objectives. And so, what we would call this, if we were pulling out, say, Terra Mystica or Anachrony, we would call these, asymmetric factions with asymmetric victory conditions, right? And that's what these are. They're card driven. They take actual historical events, And then they create actions that you can take in the game. So you have a deck of cards. You see the card in play. You see the next card. If you're eligible, you can play the event or take a command, and it costs you resources to do that. If you take a turn this time, you get to sit out the next time, and then your opponents get to play the next card possibly. So basically, you keep flipping these cards, and there's some, depending on the game you're playing, there's usually a card that's a interrupt that resets the game state a little bit, lets everybody gain some more resources, maybe move some stuff around, check the victory conditions when you always have this game interrupt. And you just keep cycling through that until either someone achieves the victory conditions or you play through all the cards and you see who has achieved their goals the best, I guess, is a way to put that. Politics, diplomacy, some type of wargaming, very simplified wargaming, influence, just trying to do influence control as opposed to area control. That's a little bit different. But it's a constantly changing game state. Now, I've never played it multiplayer, but I think it would play a lot faster multiplayer. It's when you get into the solo mode that the game really takes a long time. And I don't know, we'll get into that. I can explain that, or Liz can explain that when you're ready to have that explained. But
well, I guess we're here. I mean, are we talking about? There's a bunch of coins, right? So I don't know a lot of them. I mean, I what I hear is if you're gonna play a starter coin game or a simpler coin game, that Cuba Libre is the one that I want.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone says that. What do you think, Tommy?
Well, so I have experience with 3, and I probably did it backwards. I probably picked the most complicated one to start, and I loved it. Then I went to Falling Sky. Mm-hmm. Then I went to Falling Sky. Then I went to Cuba Libre, which is what I'm working on now. So of the 3, I probably should have started with the Cuba Libre. It is the simplest one of the 3 that I've tried.
Which one?
And if I were to teach it, this is the one I would start with for sure.
Mm-hmm. Which one do you like best?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I like Liberty or Death because of the theme, which is the Revolutionary War, which I like reading a lot about. But I like all the games. They're all the ones I've tried are excellent.
Tommy, is Liberty or Death the one that you started with?
That's the one I started with.
Me too.
and I wouldn't recommend it. There was actually a thread just this past week on GMT's Facebook group page. An individual, he bought Liberty or Death and Cuba Libre. He started with Liberty or Death. He went through the playbook. He said he kind of grasped the whole thing. Then he went into solo mode, and he pulled his hair out and threw up his hands and threw it on eBay. All right, he gave up on it.
No. So I actually played Liberty or Death with someone who's in my game group who's awesome. Shout out Peter Michael. But he brought it and we didn't finish the game. We played for 4 hours. But it was great. I had a really good experience with it. So I think that made it easier for me to kind of start moving towards solo coin because it was only 2 of us. So we were both playing our factions and then using the bots. So This is where we're going, right? Which is if you play a solo coin game, you have to control the other players using the bot sheets.
Aha. So maybe you want to explain a little bit about those flowcharty, multi-page, intimidating solo bots. I know I'm kind of gassing it up, because that's the barrier, right? We're talking about breaking down barriers. I mean, is that true? Is it true that these bots are like these impossible things, and that's what takes forever?
I wouldn't say they're impossible. I would say that actually. So, Tommy, you mentioned Labyrinth earlier. It's like a okay. So the reason I would start with Labyrinth if I'm going to go in a coiny direction is because it's a 2-player game. So there's only one bot that you have to worry about. Mm. So all coin games that are 4 people really need 4 players or to be filled with bots. You can't have an interesting and evolving game state without moves from all 4 factions. So you have to be willing to play your own turn and then play 3 other turns that aren't really you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see that being frustrating for some people. For me, it's actually really interesting, and I found it very cool for learning how other factions work and for understanding the game better without me having to think it through, because the flowcharts are neat because it's like, oh, is this happening? No, okay, go here. Is this happening? No, here, okay, do this. And so, it'll ask questions that actually have some strategic value. So I actually found them useful in terms of learning how to play the game better. And, once you kind of know what you're doing, they're not as bad. But working through them the first few times when you're still trying to figure out how to play yourself and then also controlling the bots, it's educational, but it also takes forever.
So is that the part that takes forever? Are you controlling bots and that takes all the time, or are you thinking and brain burning your turns and that's what takes all the time?
Can I elaborate on this one a little bit?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
Let me. I'm gonna give you both ends of the spectrum. I'm gonna use Liberty or Death and Cuba Libre. All right. So determining what the opponent has to do is actually pretty easy and pretty quick. That doesn't take long. I mean, every faction in these games, they only have 4 commands, right? So you just got to figure out which one of the 4 commands are they going to do. That's pretty easy. All right. When you decide which command needs to be executed in Liberty or Death, then it starts getting into these if-then nested loops, right? If then do, if this, then do that. And in that circumstance, if this, then do that. If this, then do that. So on Liberty or Death, there's the 13 colonies, obviously. Then there's maybe 4 other areas, and there's like 5 or 6 cities. So there's 24 areas where an opponent could take an action, right? So it just becomes overwhelming real quick. So what I had to do in order to navigate Liberty or Death, I had to get out a pen and a piece of paper. And, so the first if says, so, all right, there's 16 places I can go. All right, then do this. Here's your priority. So then you get to 16. I whittle those down to 8. Okay, once you get that down, here's the next step. Get it down to 4. And then, all right, then you do those 4 actions, or you do 3, depending on how many resources you have. That takes a lot of time. You can spend 30 to 45 minutes resolving one turn for one of your 3 opponents. You can. Right. Now,
oh no.
Yes. now let me
I just felt my knees melt. I'm sitting down.
let me turn to Cuba Libre real quick. Right. So it uses the same system. You got 3 bots. They got 4 commands. The decision is easy. It takes no more or no less time to figure out what that decision is than Liberty or Death. You can resolve the action in Cuba Libre in 10 or 15 minutes without pen and without paper. So, it's only got 8 areas on the board. It's a much smaller map, much smaller decision space to figure out how to resolve the action. So what takes the bot so long, to me, in my mind, is resolving the actions. Determining actions easy, but resolving it's what takes all the time.
Resolving it, like setting, like moving the piece or rolling the die, or
so if you got it says move your pieces to the thing that has the least resistance, something like that. Well, there might be 6 of those things. All right. So then it takes it down to the next priority level. So it's just whittling it down to figure out where things need to go. So that's what makes I think the coin system as a solitaire system kind of tough for people to get into. You got to leave the game out. You can scale the game like Liberty or Death has. You can do the massive game with across all 6 years that the game covers, or you can do a smaller game 4 years, or even a smaller game 2 years. You can scale Cuba Libre a little bit. You just take some of the cards out of the deck, but it's still long games, still very long games.
And it's going to something that you were mentioning before, Liz, in another conversation. There's very few examples of filmed solo war games. So you try to search for some, just to kind of break down the barrier. People learn by, a lot of people learn by seeing. Like old war gamers are like, just give me the rule book. if you get learned out the rule book, you can't play. Another barrier thing. So it's hard to find videos. So I remember because you were talking about you couldn't find your videos and you were thinking of making your own.
Yeah, I actually am. So for those of you who only hear me on here, I do have a channel. It's called Beyond Solitaire, and I normally do just whatever solo games I'm playing. So the thing that's actually been hard for me is a, quote, content creator. I don't really like that term. I see myself more as like a board game media person. I don't know. Is that, there's always this call for output, and if you're not consistent with putting videos on your channel, the channel starts to kind of fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just true. Like, people quit watching channels that don't produce videos. But I've been thinking about kind of slowing down my output to take the time to make some really good tutorials that I feel happy with for some of the games. So, I have tutorials up for, easier war games. I've definitely done, a Wars of Marcus Aurelius video. I've got an Agricola Master of Britain, another Hollandspiele title coming out in, the next couple of weeks. I filmed that, edited that. I've got Pavlov's House, but I think that, as I'm moving into these more complicated war games, I'm thinking hard about how to film them in a way that will enable the people watching my videos to understand what's going on and then go back to the rule book with a greater sense of confidence. Mm-hmm. And it's because there's so much going on, I have to think about how best to teach that. And I'm thinking about that as a larger project for me in the next year or so.
I think that would really help the Gateway project, because I really do think that, especially nowadays, fewer and fewer people are reading. There's your teacher.
Yes, I know it. Or they're reading, but they're reading little comments on Snapchat. That's what I witnessed in my classroom today. So.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
I have a channel. Can you recommend somebody else's channel? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Go ahead. This is part of the deal.
So check out, if you want to see how an excellent way to provide tutorials for war games, complicated war games. Check out a YouTube channel called Harsh Rules.
I watched his Liberty or Death stuff. Yes, continue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So he does a brilliant job. Absolutely brilliant. I think he does anyway. But did you? No,
I agree.
Videos? Yeah,
I did. Yeah, I thought the Harsh Rule stuff was good, and he also has some guides that are on BGG. Mm-hmm. There's principles that I'm pretty sure came from Harsh Rules for Liberty or Death, at least that I used, that came off of Board Game Geek. So yes, definitely. It's just that for using the solo bots, that's a whole.
Yeah, that's a lot different.
Yeah. Usually, you can find wargaming content. It's the solo wargaming content that I don't think makes the camera too much.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you got to film that 45 minutes doing the bot.
I'm gonna do it.
Or speed through it somehow, do the the yakety sax music while you're zipping through the flowchart.
Yeah.
Oh God.
So I think I played my Falling Sky game, right? So I think when I did that one solo, I played with the shorter deck, 30 cards instead of 45 cards. Mm-hmm. And it took me 6 hours. I got pretty good at figuring out what the decision would be without having to refer to the chart so much. But again, my time was spent on resolving the action.
Yeah, it does take time. And then for me, from my perspective as a reviewer, right, the thing that's the hardest about preparing to review a game like that, and one of the reasons that I've been playing war games for a year, but I haven't published too many reviews of them, is that it takes a long time to get in enough plays to feel like you can intelligently comment on the quality of the game. I've been wanting to play multiples so I can talk about one game as opposed to another one and have some context. And, that process, as somebody who's planning to, who has a solo gaming channel and wants to produce videos about it, the amount of prep that's taking is unexpectedly large because I want to do it right. I'm enjoying myself though, so that's fine. It doesn't bother me.
All right.
But yeah, it takes a while. Those plays are long.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other good recommendations for video channels as we wind down, Tommy?
As far as tutorial type,
just providing the whole point of the episode is to break down barriers. So if you find that there are content,
I like the Player's Aid.
Yeah,
the Player's Aid is really good, and they're they do the full spectrum. It's just not wargaming. They play hobby board games too. So and I like them because they're bringing the perspective of the war game to the hobby board gamer because they're hobby board gamers too.
All right, so I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, in terms of helping people on-ramp into war games, we've mentioned a lot of games. We've gone, the different companies, GMT and DVG and all that kind of stuff. Thank you guys so much for sharing your journey, sharing some tips. Please, Tommy, thank you so much. You're a great fan of ENGN, and I hope that you're not a stranger on the show.
All right, thank you very much for having me. I hope your fans don't give you a lot of thumbs downs on this one because of me.
No way. It'll be my fault. Don't worry, it's fine.
I wonder how many people will listen. It's war games. Not to talk. No, I'm just kidding. Liz, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
It's always a pleasure to be on.